Hello, my name is Dr. Carlos Oliveira, and I have an incredible story to share with you, a story that completely changed my life and my worldview. Before I begin, you must understand that I am a man of science. I have been a cardiac surgeon for over 20 years, graduated from the University of São Paulo with specializations in the United States and Europe. I have always been guided by logic, by facts, by scientific evidence. And above all, I have always been a staunch atheist. I grew up in a non-religious family. My parents were university professors and taught me from an early age to question everything, to seek rational explanations for the phenomena of the world. The idea of God, to me, was merely a product of human imagination, an emotional crutch for those who could not deal with life's uncertainties. I was living my life completely satisfied with that view. I had a successful career, a loving family, and I believed I had all the answers I needed, until that fateful day 2 years ago, when everything changed. It was a Friday like any other. I had just finished performing a particularly difficult coronary bypass surgery and was exhausted. I decided to go home early, something I rarely did. On the way, I stopped at a traffic light and, suddenly, felt a sharp pain in my chest. At first, I thought it was just stress, but within seconds, the pain intensified to an almost unbearable level. I knew what was happening. As a cardiologist, I immediately recognized the signs. I was having a heart attack. The irony of the situation did not escape me. I, who had saved so many hearts, was now fighting for my own life. I managed to pull over, and with the last of my strength, I called for emergency help. My vision began to darken, my breathing became labored, and I felt an overwhelming fear taking over. Was this it? After all, would I simply cease to exist? It was at that moment, on the verge of unconsciousness, that something extraordinary happened. Something that defied everything I believed in, everything I considered possible. Something that made me question the very foundation of my understanding of reality. But before I continue with this surprising part of my story, you need to understand the complete context. You need to know exactly who I was before this event, so you can comprehend the monumental impact it had on my life. Imagine a completely skeptical man, a dedicated scientist who spent his days immersed in studies, research, and complex surgeries. Someone who saw the human body as a fascinating machine, but nothing more. A set of interconnected biological systems without any supernatural or spiritual element. I used to look down on those who spoke of religious or spiritual experiences. To me, they were merely manifestations of neurological processes, perhaps hallucinations induced by stress or sensory deprivation. I had scientific explanations for everything and saw no need to invoke the supernatural. I remember once, during a lecture I gave at a medical congress, when I was questioned about the existence of the soul, I answered with conviction, "The soul is just a concept created to explain what science has not yet fully understood. As we advance our understanding of the brain and consciousness, the idea of the soul will become obsolete." That was my worldview. Solid, unwavering, founded on years of study and medical practice. And it was with that mentality that I faced that crucial moment, lying on the asphalt, feeling my heart fail. What happened next? Well, it is something that still leaves me perplexed to this day. Something that defied all my previous understanding of life, death, and the nature of reality. But before I reveal what I experienced, I need to pause, take a deep breath, get ready, because what I'm about to tell you may change your perspective forever, just as it changed mine. Are you ready to continue this journey with me? To dive into the unknown and question everything you think you know about life and death? If so, then let's move forward. What happened next was, suddenly, everything went dark. The chest pain disappeared, as did all the sounds and sensations around me. For a brief moment, I thought I had died. But then, something incredible happened. A bright light began to emerge, not coming from a specific direction, but from everywhere at once. It was the purest and brightest light I had ever seen, yet, curiously, it did not hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it was comforting and welcoming. I felt enveloped by a sense of peace and serenity that I had never experienced before. All the fear and anxiety I had felt during the heart attack simply dissipated. It was as if I were being embraced by an unconditional and infinite love. Then, amid that light, I sensed a presence. I couldn't see a defined form, but I knew that someone was there with me. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't a voice in the conventional sense. It was more as if thoughts were being transmitted directly into my consciousness. The voice said, "Carlos, my son, do not be afraid. You are safe here." I was astonished. As a scientist, my mind immediately began to search for rational explanations for what was happening. Could it be a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen in my brain? Some kind of stress-induced dream? But something inside me knew it was more than that. The presence seemed to sense my confusion and continued, "I know you have many doubts. You have spent your life seeking answers through science. Your quest for knowledge is noble, but there is so much more in the universe than what can be measured and observed." I tried to speak, to ask questions, but I realized I had no voice. I had no body. It was as if I were pure consciousness floating in this sea of light. The presence continued, "You have touched many lives, Carlos. You have saved many hearts, but now it is time to open your own heart to a greater truth." At that moment, I began to see flashes of my life, not just important moments, but small details I had long forgotten. I saw myself as a child, curious about the world. I saw myself as a student, fascinated by the complexity of the human body. I saw every patient I had ever treated, every life I had touched. But the most surprising was to see the moments when I doubted, when I questioned if there was something more beyond what I could see and touch. Moments of vulnerability that I had buried deep within my psyche. The voice spoke again. "You were never alone, Carlos. Even in the moments when you denied my existence, I was there, guiding your steps, inspiring your curious mind." I felt an overwhelming emotion wash over me. It was as if all the barriers I had built over the years were crumbling. For the first time in my life, I felt truly humble before the unknown. The presence, which I now began to understand as Jesus, he continued, "I am not here to judge you, but to show you that there is more to existence than you imagine. The science you love so much is a wonderful tool to understand the physical world, but there are realities beyond it." At that moment, I had a panoramic vision of the universe. I saw galaxies forming, stars being born and dying, the cosmic dance of creation on a scale that my mind could barely comprehend. And amid all that, I saw the delicate complexity of life, from DNA to the most intricate ecosystems. Jesus said, "All of this, from the greatest to the smallest, is part of a divine plan, a plan of which you are also a part." I was amazed. How could I, a simple surgeon, be part of something so vast and grand? How could my small existence have any meaning in the face of the immense cosmos? As if reading my thoughts, Jesus replied, "Every life is precious, Carlos. Every act of kindness, every quest for knowledge, every moment of love, all of it echoes through eternity." I felt overwhelmed. My whole life, I had sought answers in science, in logic, in reason. And now, here I was, facing a reality that defied everything I had believed I knew. But before I could fully process what was happening, I felt a change. The light began to diminish, and I heard Jesus say, "It is not your time yet, Carlos. You have more to do in the world of the living." I wanted to protest, to stay longer in that place of peace and unconditional love, but I felt myself being pulled back to my body, back to the pain, back to the reality I knew. The last words I heard before returning were, "Remember, Carlos, remember and share." And then I opened my eyes. I was back on the asphalt, surrounded by paramedics working frantically to revive me. The chest pain had subsided, and I could hear the distant sound of an ambulance siren. But something had changed. I had changed, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. What happened next, how this experience transformed my life and my medical practice, is an equally fascinating story. But before we delve into that part, I need to pause, reflect on what you have just heard. open your mind to the possibilities that exist beyond our everyday understanding. Are you ready to continue this journey with me? To explore how an encounter with the divine can completely change the worldview of a skeptical scientist? If so, then let's move forward. What happened after was, I opened my eyes and reality hit me like a wave. The rough asphalt under my back, the murmuring of worried voices around me, the smell of antiseptic, everything seemed intensified. It was as if I were experiencing the world for the first time. The paramedics were surprised by my sudden recovery. My vital signs had stabilized in a way they considered almost miraculous. I was rushed to the hospital where I worked, now as a patient. In the following days, I underwent a battery of tests. My colleagues were perplexed. The damage to my heart was minimal, considering the severity of the heart attack I had suffered. From a medical standpoint, I was a rare case of exceptional recovery. But the true recovery, the real change, was happening within me, on a level that no medical exam could detect. While I was recuperating in the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about the experience I had. Every detail was vividly engraved in my memory. The light, the sense of peace, the loving presence, the words of Jesus. Everything seemed more real than anything I had ever experienced. My colleagues noticed the change in me. The skeptical and pragmatic doctor, Carlos they knew seemed to have been replaced by someone more contemplative, more open. When they asked me what had happened, I hesitated. How could I explain something so profound and personal to people who, like I once did, based their understanding of the world exclusively on science? But gradually I began to share, first with my wife, then with close friends. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to fascination. Some suggested that I had suffered some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Others were intrigued and wanted to know more. The most surprising was the reaction of my patients. When I returned to work, something had changed in the way I related to them. Before, I saw them mainly as medical cases, problems to be solved. Now, I saw them as complete human beings, with stories, fears, and hopes. I began to dedicate more time to talking with my patients, to understanding not just their physical symptoms, but also their emotional and spiritual concerns. And I noticed something extraordinary. Patients whom I treated in this way seemed to recover faster, with fewer complications. One case in particular deeply marked me. Maria, a 78-year-old lady, had been admitted for a high-risk heart surgery. Before the operation, I spent some time talking with her. Maria told me about her faith, about how she believed that God was guiding her through that difficult moment. In the past, I would have internally dismissed her beliefs as superstition, but now I listened with an open heart. I shared a bit of my own experience with her, without going into details, but enough for her to know that I understood her spiritual perspective. Maria's surgery was a success, and her recovery was remarkably swift. She later told me that our conversation had given her strength and peace of mind to face the procedure. Cases like Maria's made me completely rethink my approach to medicine. I began to see that healing was not just a physical process, but also an emotional and spiritual one. I started incorporating practices such as meditation and guided visualization in preparing my patients for surgeries. Some of my more skeptical colleagues mocked these new approaches. "Since when did Dr. Carlos become a spiritual healer?" I heard one of them comment sarcastically, but the results spoke for themselves. My surgical success rates, which were already high, improved even further. Patient satisfaction increased significantly, but the deepest change was happening within me. I began to see life in a completely new way. Every heartbeat, every breath, seemed like a miracle. The complexity of the human body, which I once saw merely as a fascinating biological puzzle, now seemed like proof of the existence of an intelligent design, of a creative force beyond our understanding. This did not mean that I had abandoned science. On the contrary, my love for research and scientific knowledge only grew. But now I saw science not as an end in itself, but as a tool to understand and appreciate the divine creation. I began to read about other near-death experiences, about the intersection between spirituality and science. I discovered that there were many other medical professionals who had undergone experiences similar to mine, people who had seen beyond the veil of physical reality and returned to tell the tale. One day, during a lecture at a medical congress, I decided to publicly share my experience for the first time. The reaction was mixed. Some colleagues were fascinated, others skeptical, and some even hostile. But what surprised me the most was the number of people who came to speak with me privately afterwards, sharing their own inexplicable experiences. I realized that I had touched on something deep, something many longed to discuss but were afraid to do so in a traditional scientific environment. I decided that it was time to be more vocal about my experience, to use my position and reputation to open a dialogue about the intersection between science and spirituality. I began writing articles, giving interviews, and participating in debates. It wasn't always easy. I faced harsh criticism, accusations of having lost scientific rigor, and even threats to my career. But something inside me, that certainty I had gained during my experience, drove me to continue. And gradually, things began to change. More and more professionals in the medical field started to open up to the idea that there was more to healing than just procedures and medications. The idea of a holistic approach to health, which takes into account not just the body but also the mind and spirit, began to gain acceptance. But my journey was far from over. What happened next would test my faith and dedication in ways I never could have imagined, a challenge that would make me question everything once again and lead me to an even deeper understanding of my purpose in this world. Are you ready to hear the final chapter of this extraordinary story? To discover how all these experiences culminated in a revelation that would change not only my life, but potentially the future of medicine. If so, then let's continue. What happened next was, as my story spread, both my personal and professional life underwent drastic changes. I received invitations to speak all over the country, not only at medical congresses but also at spiritual and philosophical events. My practice began to receive patients from distant places, people seeking not just medical treatment, but also a more holistic perspective on their health. However, not everything was smooth sailing. I faced significant resistance within the traditional medical community. Some colleagues, who once respected me as a renowned surgeon, now looked at me with suspicion. There was even an attempt to question my professional competence, claiming that my new beliefs might compromise my medical judgment. It was a difficult period. I questioned myself many times whether I had made the right choice by sharing my experience so openly. There were nights when I wondered if it would have been better to keep everything secret, to continue my career as before, without causing waves. But then, something happened that reaffirmed my decision in a way I never could have predicted. It was a Saturday night and I was on call at the hospital. I was called for an emergency. A 25-year-old man, victim of a serious car accident. His name was Andre, and he was in critical condition when he arrived at the emergency room. I spent hours in the operating room, fighting to save Andre's life. It was one of the most difficult operations of my career. There were moments when I thought we would lose him, but something inside me, that same presence I had felt during my near-death experience, seemed to guide me. My hands seemed to be moved by a force beyond myself. After nearly 12 hours of surgery, we managed to stabilize Andre. He was alive, but in a coma. The following days would be critical. I stayed close to Andre's case, visiting him daily in the ICU. His family was devastated, especially his mother, Donna Clara. One day, while talking with her in the hospital corridor, I felt compelled to share a bit of my experience. I told Donna Clara about my encounter with Jesus, about the peace I felt, about the certainty that there is something beyond this life. I saw tears in her eyes as I spoke. She hugged me and said, "Doctor, you have no idea how much your words comfort me. I have prayed so hard for a miracle for my Andre." In the days that followed, I noticed a change in Donna Clara. She seemed calmer, more hopeful. She began talking to Andre even though he was in a coma, telling him about my experience and encouraging him to fight. And then, a week later, Andre opened his eyes. His recovery was remarkable. Not only did he survive an accident that many considered fatal, but he also recovered faster than anyone could have predicted. When Andre finally could speak, he told us something surprising. He said that while he was in a coma, he had an experience similar to mine. He spoke of a bright light, a deep sense of peace, and an encounter with a loving presence he identified as Jesus. Andre said he was encouraged to return, that he still had much to do in this life. I was astonished. Here was a confirmation of my own experience, coming from a patient who had no prior knowledge of what had happened to me. This event was a turning point. I realized that sharing my story was not just an option, it was a responsibility. If my experience could bring comfort and hope to people in difficult moments, as it had for Donna Clara, then I had a duty to keep speaking. I began to more openly integrate spiritual aspects into my medical practice, not by imposing my beliefs on patients, but by offering a broader perspective on health and healing to those who were open to it. Surprisingly, this approach began to attract more positive attention than negative. Other doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals started to take an interest in my approach. I was invited to speak at medical schools, discussing the importance of treating the patient as a whole, body, mind, and spirit. But not everything was a success or affirmation. There were moments of intense doubt, moments when I wondered if it was all nothing more than an elaborate construction of my mind. One particular case shook me deeply. A patient, Louisa, came to see me after hearing about my experience. She was fighting against aggressive cancer and seeking hope. I shared my story with her, spoke about the peace I felt, about the certainty that there is something beyond this life. Louisa clung to that hope. She fought bravely against cancer, always saying that my story gave her strength. But despite all efforts, Louisa did not survive. I was devastated. I deeply questioned myself. Had I given Louisa false hope? Was my experience truly real, or just an illusion created by an oxygen-deprived brain? I spent sleepless nights grappling with these questions. It was the most difficult period since my near-death experience. I felt lost, confused, almost ready to give everything up and return to my old life of pure skepticism. But then, something unexpected happened. Something that once again would change my perspective and reaffirm my faith in a way I never could have imagined. What happened next is perhaps the most surprising part of my story, a series of events that led me to an even deeper understanding of the purpose of my experience and my role in this world. Are you ready to hear the climax of this journey? To discover how I faced my deepest doubts and found a new meaning for my life and work? If so, then let's continue. What happened after that period of intense doubt was, one night, exhausted after a long day of surgeries and tormented by doubts, I fell asleep in my office at the hospital. It was then that I had a vivid dream, as real as my near-death experience. In the dream, I was back in that space of pure light where I had met Jesus, but this time I saw Louisa. She was radiant, smiling, free of any pain or suffering. Beside her was Jesus, looking at me with compassion. Louisa approached and said, "Dr. Carlos, do not blame yourself. Your story gave me something far more valuable than a physical cure. It gave me peace. I understood that life does not end with the death of the body. Thank you for sharing your experience with me." I woke with tears in my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and awe. Although it was just a dream, I felt that I had received an important message. I realized that my role was not to guarantee specific outcomes, but to offer comfort, hope, and a broader perspective on life and death. Renewed by that experience, I decided to delve deeper into research on near-death experiences and the relationship between spirituality and health. I began collaborating with neuroscientists, psychologists, and spiritual leaders from various traditions. One study in particular caught my attention. A group of researchers was investigating the effects of prayer and meditation on the recovery of cardiac patients. The preliminary results were fascinating, suggesting that patients who received spiritual support in addition to standard medical treatment had significantly higher recovery rates. Inspired by this research, I proposed a similar study at our hospital. I faced initial resistance, but eventually obtained approval for a pilot project. We formed a multidisciplinary team, including doctors, nurses, psychologists, and chaplains from various religions. The study lasted 2 years and the results were astonishing. Patients who received spiritual support, according to their own beliefs, in addition to standard medical treatment, showed 23% higher recovery rates, a lower incidence of post-operative depression, and reported higher overall satisfaction with their treatment. These results caused a stir in the medical community. I was invited to present our findings at international conferences. Respected medical journals published our articles. Slowly but surely, the idea of integrating spiritual care into mainstream medical practice began to gain traction, but not all were applauding. I faced fierce criticism from some sectors of the scientific community. I was accused of pseudoscience and of compromising the integrity of medical research. There was even an attempt to discredit our study, alleging methodological flaws. It was a stressful period. My professional integrity was being questioned. There were moments when I thought of giving up, of returning to my old life as a traditional surgeon. But then, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from Dr. Robertson, a renowned neuroscientist from Harvard University. He had read our study and was intrigued. "Dr. Carlos," he said, "I believe you are on the brink of a new frontier in medicine. I would like to propose a collaboration." In the following months, we worked together to develop an even more rigorous research protocol. Using cutting-edge technology, including functional magnetic resonance imaging and advanced electroencephalography, we began studying what happens in the brain during profound spiritual experiences, including near-death experiences. The results were fascinating. We discovered unique patterns of brain activity associated with these experiences, but the most intriguing part was that these patterns could not be fully explained by current neuroscientific models. There was something more happening, something that challenged our current understanding of the brain and consciousness. Our work began to attract international attention. I was invited to give a TED Talk, where I shared my personal story and our scientific findings. The video went viral, reaching millions of views in just a few days. Suddenly, I found myself at the center of a growing movement. Doctors, scientists, and spiritual leaders from around the world began reaching out, wanting to collaborate, share experiences, and explore this new frontier between science and spirituality. We founded the Institute for Integrative Medicine and Consciousness Studies, an interdisciplinary research center dedicated to exploring the intersection of physical, mental, and spiritual health. The Institute quickly became a global hub for cutting-edge research in this area. But with growing visibility came new challenges. Fundamentalist religious groups tried to co-opt our work to promote specific agendas. On the other hand, staunch skeptics accused us of undermining the scientific method. Navigating these turbulent waters required all my diplomatic tact and scientific integrity. Amidst all this, I never lost sight of what truly mattered: the patients. I continued practicing surgery, now integrating holistic approaches into my work. I witnessed miracles, not miracles in the sense of breaking the laws of nature, but in the form of extraordinary recoveries that defied medical expectations. One case in particular remained etched in my memory. Sarah, a 12-year-old girl, was brought to the hospital with a rare and potentially fatal heart condition. Other doctors had told the family that nothing could be done, but something told me not to give up. I spent hours studying Sarah's case, consulting colleagues around the world. Finally, I developed an innovative treatment plan, combining cutting-edge surgery with complementary therapies. The surgery was a success, but the post-operative period was critical. It was then that I saw the power of a holistic approach in action. Sarah's family, her medical team, and even community volunteers came together to create a healing environment. Not just for Sarah's body, but for her mind and spirit as well. Against all odds, Sarah made a full recovery. Seeing her leave the hospital, smiling and full of life, was one of the most rewarding moments of my career. This experience solidified my conviction that we were on the right path. That true healing involves more than just medical procedures. It involves love, compassion, faith, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. But my journey was far from over. What happened next would test my faith and dedication in ways I never could have imagined. A challenge that would make me question everything once again and lead me to an even deeper understanding of my purpose in this world. Are you ready to hear the final chapter of this extraordinary story? To discover how all these experiences culminated in a revelation that would change not only my life, but potentially the future of medicine. If so, then let's continue. What happened next was the success of the Institute for Integrative Medicine and Consciousness Studies attracted the attention of a prominent and controversial figure, the technology billionaire Elon Musk. He was interested in our research on consciousness and wanted to integrate our findings into his Neuralink project, which aims to connect the human brain directly to computers. Musk's proposal was tempting: virtually unlimited resources for our research, access to cutting-edge technology, and the possibility of taking our work to a completely new level. But it also raised profound ethical questions. Would we be opening a Pandora's box? How far should we go in the exploration and manipulation of human consciousness? I spent sleepless nights debating with myself. On one hand, the opportunity to advance our research was incredible. On the other hand, I feared the possible unintended consequences. I remembered my experience with Jesus, the love and peace I felt. Were we risking losing something precious in the pursuit of technological advancement? I decided to share my dilemma with the Institute's team. Opinions were divided. Some were excited about the possibilities. Others shared my concerns. I realized that this was not a decision I could make alone. I organized a global conference, bringing together scientists, spiritual leaders, philosophers, and ethics experts from around the world. For a week, we engaged in intense debates about the pros and cons of Musk's proposal and the broader implications of our research. It was during this conference that I had another experience that would change everything. After an especially intense day of debates, I went for a walk to clear my mind. As I strolled through a nearby park, I felt a sudden wave of peace wash over me. It was familiar, the same sensation I had experienced during my near-death experience. Suddenly, I had a clear vision. I saw a future where technology and spirituality were not opposites, but complementary. I saw people using brain-computer interfaces not to escape reality, but to deepen their connection with the divine. I saw hospitals where the healing of the body, mind, and spirit were treated as one, but I also saw the dangers. I saw how this technology could be misused, how it could create even greater divisions in society, how it could make us lose our humanity if not guided by solid ethical principles. When the vision ended, I was on my knees in the middle of the park, tears streaming down my face. I knew what needed to be done. I returned to the conference with a new determination. I presented my vision to the participants, not as a prophecy, but as a possibility, a future that we could choose to create together. The impact was immediate. The atmosphere of the conference changed. We were no longer merely debating the merits of a business proposal. We were discussing the future of humanity. At the end of the week, we reached a consensus. We would accept Musk's offer, but under conditions. We would establish an independent ethics board to oversee the research. We would ensure that our findings were made public, not owned by a single company, and most importantly, we would maintain our focus on the holistic well-being of people, not just technological advancement. The years that followed were a roller coaster. Our research advanced rapidly. We developed brain-computer interfaces that allowed people in comas to communicate with their loved ones. We created virtual reality therapies that helped patients overcome deep-seated traumas. We discovered ways to induce profound meditative states in people struggling with stress and anxiety, but we also faced challenges. There were attempts to steal our technology for military purposes. We faced lawsuits from religious groups who feared we were playing God. And we had to deal with the unintended consequences of our research, such as when we discovered that some people were becoming addicted to the altered states of consciousness our technology could induce. Through it all, I remained anchored in my original experience with Jesus. Whenever I faced a difficult decision, I remembered that moment of peace and clarity. Not that it made decisions easier, but it gave me the courage to follow what I believed was the right path. Today, at 63, I look back and can hardly believe the journey I have been on. From a skeptical surgeon to a pioneer at the frontier between science and spirituality. From a staunch atheist to someone who saw beyond the veil of physical reality, I do not have all the answers. In fact, the more I learn, the more I realize how much there still is to discover. But one thing I am sure of, there is more in this universe than we can see or measure. There is a spiritual dimension of existence that science is only beginning to understand. My mission now is to build bridges. Bridges between science and spirituality, between technology and humanity, between knowledge and wisdom. I believe that the future of medicine and of humanity as a whole depends on our ability to integrate these different perspectives. To those who are listening to this story, my message is simple. Keep your minds and hearts open. Do not be afraid to question your beliefs, whether they are scientific or spiritual. Seek the truth with humility and compassion. And always remember, each one of us has a purpose in this world. Sometimes it takes an extraordinary experience to show us what that purpose is, but when we find it, we have the responsibility to follow it, no matter where it leads us. My journey began with a heart attack and an encounter with Jesus. Where will your journey take you? Only you can find out. But I can guarantee one thing. If you keep your heart open to the infinite possibilities of the universe, you will find your way. Thank you for listening to my story. May it inspire you to embark on your own journey of discovery and transformation. And so I conclude my account, a story of faith, science, doubt, and discovery. A story that began with an atheist surgeon and ended with a transformed man, dedicated to uniting the worlds of science and spirituality. But remember, this is not just my story. It is an invitation for each of you to explore the frontiers of knowledge and human experience, to question, to discover, and above all, to keep your hearts open to the infinite wonders of this incredible universe we inhabit. May the peace and love I experienced in that transcendent moment touch your lives just as they touched mine. And may we together build a future where science and spirituality walk side by side, lighting the way to a wiser, more compassionate, and connected humanity. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. May your own journeys be equally transformative and revealing.